specifically. Now, despite dealing with this pandemic and seeing a number of people, especially with the Omicron variant, out sick, we've seen that happen not just with people in San Francisco, but many of our city workers, including those from our police and fire departments, the public safety arm of San Francisco. And I just want to take this opportunity to really thank our police officers. Many of them have had to do overtime because we've had hundreds of officers out as a result of Omicron, and others have had to step up to take their place. We know that there are a number of challenges that we see, and we know that people are anxious to see improvements in the Tenderloin community with the emergency declaration. But the fact is, we have a number of city employees that are out. Others have stepped up to take their place, and we want to ensure that not only are we doing what we need to do in the Tenderloin community to keep that community safe, we also need to make sure that we're keeping everyone in the entire city safe. We know that that is such a priority for so many San Franciscans, and as a leader of the city, it is a priority for me. Nothing is more important than to make sure that people who live in this city, people who work in this city, people who visit San Francisco feel safe as they walk down the streets. And the fact is, that does require police officers. It does require folks who are part of our public safety network. It does require us working together. And to be clear, it does not mean that we ignore the reforms that we need to do here in San Francisco with our police department. It does not mean that we ignore all the work we're doing to provide an alternative response to policing. Those things go hand in hand with also keeping people safe so that they don't become victims of violent crime. So I want at this time to just really talk about what has been our plan moving forward. Our plan moving forward, of course, is definitely contingent upon us providing those various services with our street crisis response team, our ambassadors, our escorts for our seniors, so many great programs in San Francisco with a lot of nonprofit agencies that are working hand in hand with us to deliver for San Franciscans who are most impacted by crime. Yesterday I was in Chinatown. We were talking about the statistics and the hate crimes that have increased by 567% in the in the API community specifically, and our need to enhance our services and our support, which is what we're doing, because that is critically important to the safety of that community and to making sure that people understand that we don't tolerate this, and we will do everything we can to make sure that justice is served for the victims of these violent attacks. And part of that is making sure that we have a robust police department, a department that has officers who can not only walk the beat, but those that can investigate crime, those that can deal with a number of the challenges and victim services and support all the things that we need in order to make sure that not only are people kept safe and we prevent those crimes from happening in the first place, but once they happen, that there is a process to bring those who commit those violent acts to hold them accountable. And that's what this is all about. The department, over the past couple of years since 2019, has seen a reduction in the number of police officers by about 20%. And so we're operating with the staffing that we have and meeting the needs all over San Francisco, but we clearly need more. Just recently, we received a letter from the Comptroller's Office of San Francisco that says if we don't move forward with the supplemental that I introduced for $22.5 million to help with the costs associated with the police and fire department, services will be impacted because they won't be able to allow us to spend above our means. And so what does that mean? That means that the Comptroller's Office will come in and make certain decisions for us. That means that the police academy classes, which are already struggling with recruitment for our police department, won't happen. That means no more backfilling of officers, no more getting police officers on the streets in the numbers that we need in order to ensure safety. That's what it means. It means our fire department will be affected. $7.9 million for the police, $14.6 million, I believe, for the fire department to address what we know is, again, the overtime related to the additional services needed from people being out sick, and also the shortage in staffing of people who have retired or left the department for various reasons. This is not asking for more. This is asking for the basics, what everyone expects in this city as it relates to public safety. That's what this is about, and I am hopeful that the members of the Board of Supervisors sees it that way, sees that this is not about ideology or philosophy or whatever it is that you want to make the arguments of. This is about what people expect. When there is a shooting in the Bayview Hunters Point community, sadly, which has occurred on far too many occasions, the expectation is that the police will show up. When there's a stabbing or a shooting or an assault in a Tenderloin community, that community expects that the police will show up and they will get justice. When there is crime of any occurrence, whether it's a burglary, when someone is breaking into someone's home while they're there, can you imagine experiencing that and not having the police show up right away when you call 911? That should never happen in a major city like San Francisco. There should be an expectation if something happens and you're in need of medical treatment, the paramedics will come. When you're in need of support from law enforcement because you've been assaulted or robbed or anything has occurred, the police should be expected to show up. So this additional resources we need is about maintaining that level of service. And we know we need more, but in the meantime, as our city has really suffered during this pandemic, not just the challenges of mental illness and addiction and homelessness and all of the things that we continue to address, but crime. And crime has to be addressed in a number of ways. There is not a one-size-fits-all, but there is a real need to make sure that we don't completely deplete our police department and then still expect justice and service and support when sadly we become the victim. We can do better, and my hope is that we will do better. My hope is that the board will approve this supplemental and the police department will be able to continue the great work that they have done for San Francisco, especially during this pandemic. So with that, I'd like to introduce our police chief, Bill Scott, to talk specifically about the statistics from last year.
Thank you, Mayor Breed, and good morning, everybody. We're going to have graphics on the screen so you can follow along. And before I start with the statistics, let me start and put this in the context. Statistics are what's reported to us, and we all understand that sometimes what translates on the statistics may not be your experience. Aside from homicide, I think traditionally in policing, crimes go unreported. Homicide is probably the purest statistic that we have because it's really, really hard not to have a homicide reported or murder reported. But short of that, everything else, we know that there are crimes that we don't get because they're not reported. From shootings to robberies to burglaries, you name it, some crimes don't get reported. And I want to put that into some context because when we talk about our statistics, we're talking about what's reported to us. And we understand that for some people that may not be their experience, that might not be what they're seeing, they may be a victim, may not have reported it, or things in their particular, from their worldview or their point of view might not be consistent with what we put up. This is merely what we report. And I think it's important that we understand and put into context what statistics are. As Mayor Breed said, we know there's a lot of work that we need to do. We also know that there is a lot of good work that's been done. So we're going to talk about both. We're going to talk about the challenges, and we're going to talk about the things that where we've seen some progress and some improvement. And being that I led off talking about homicides are the purest statistic that we have, I'm going to start off with our homicide. And each one of these graphs that you see you'll see the last several years of statistics, so you can put into context what the trends are. Violent crimes, we'll start there, and we'll put into context what the trends are over time, because it paints a clearer picture when you look at crime statistics over a period of time. We had 56 homicides this past year in 2021. And when you look at this graphic, the last time we had 56 homicides was 2017. We saw a decline for 3 years, and then starting in 2019, we started to see an increase in homicides. And sadly, this is not just a San Francisco trend, this is a national trend, and this is something that is truly concerning to all of us. Many of our investigations have led us to facts that indicate that many of our cases are connected with some of the surrounding cities in the Bay Area. And so we've been doing a lot of work with those jurisdictions and those police departments, both on the law enforcement side and on the social services side, to try to turn this trend around. 56 homicides for San Francisco is a big deal. It is a big deal, and it's something that we're committed to turning around. And before I end my discussion, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we put in place to do just that. I also want to say that in our effort to bring these cases to resolution, we solved, or our clearance rate for homicides this past year was 77%. So almost 8 in 10 of our cases we solved, and that's been consistent over the last several years, and that rate is really far above the state average and the national average. So that's something that we're really pleased with. It's not to say that we can't do better. We want to solve every case, but sadly for the families and the victims, we don't solve every case, but we definitely will work as hard as we can to do just that. Those cases would not be solved without the investigators doing the work, and those investigators can't do the work if we don't have them in place. So I want to reiterate what was said by the mayor in terms of we have to have the staffing to do that. We also have to have community support. And there are too many people to thank in terms of the support that we get from many members in our community, but we'll keep pushing forward, and we want to turn that 56 to a much lower number. A couple of years ago, I think it was the mayor's first year in office or second year in office, we were at 41 homicides for the year. That was as low as we have been since the early 1960s. We want to do better than that, and that's our goal. Gun violence contributed to the majority of our homicides. In the next graphic, you'll see our gun violence victims for 2021. There were a total of 222. Again, that's as high as we've been since 2016. And you look at the trends, it really follows the homicide trends, where you see a dip 2018, 2019, and then it starts to go back up 2020, 2021. Now, we don't really know the role that the global pandemic plays in this. There's a lot of theories out there. There's a lot of anecdotal crime is high because of all reasons connected to COVID, and that all those may be true. But we really don't have the evidence to point that out. What we do know is crime, this category of crime is going up, and we need to turn it around. In terms of gun violence, we are working with several community groups and also with our mayor's office and her public safety folks in her office to bring strategies to the table. We have brought actually strategies to the table that don't only rely on us being able to solve the case, but also really addressing the people who are the most at risk. And I'm talking about the people who are at most risk of either shooting somebody or being shot. And what we have done over the last 2 years is a lot of research to really drill down on who those people are and reach out to them and their families to try to get them some help. And in the cases where we can't get them help and they commit a crime, investigate those cases thoroughly and vigorously and bring them to justice. And that balance is how we will move forward in addressing gun violence. It's been successful so far. Last year, we started out really in a hole with gun violence. Toward the end of the year, we saw some improvement. We saw cases being solved, and we saw those numbers start to go down. So we hope that that continues in 2022. It's our intention to cause that to continue as much as we can. And so far this year is early, very early, so I'm not going to put too much weight in this, but we're on a much better note in 2022 in terms of where things are than we were this time last year. Next category, rapes. As you can see in the graphic, as soon as it goes up. We had 204 rapes reported last year, which is a little bit below where we were in 2020. We saw a significant decrease between 2019 and 2020. So that's going in the right direction. Sexual assaults are right up there with homicides as far as the seriousness, the impact on our society, the impact on the victims and their families, something that we take very seriously, and hopefully we can continue to see that number go in the right direction. Next category of violent crime are robberies. So robberies, I want to put this into a little bit of context with the mayor's comments about how important staffing is. Robberies are one of those crime categories where officers on the street really make a difference. We saw this in parts of the city such as the Tenderloin. Mid-year, when we upped our deployment in the Tenderloin, we saw a pretty significant double-digit percentage-wise drop in robberies. We ended the year with 2,242 robberies, which was a slight decrease from the previous year, about 200 robberies less. We still have a lot to do with robberies, but the reason it's so important to put officers in these areas where we know these robberies are occurring is the majority of robberies are street crimes. They happen in broad daylight or at night when people are going to and from whatever it is that they're doing in their daily activities of life. When officers are present, and this is proven time and time again, we tend to have less of those events when officers are present. That's why foot patrols and foot beats and bike officers and presence and engagement is so important in terms of reducing robberies. So that is our strategy moving forward. We know it works. We know it can work. We need the people to do it, and we're committed to do just that. Part of our analysis when we identify where robberies are occurring, or we identify what we call hot spots, usually the drill is we identify a hot spot. In a best case scenario, the officers are there to begin with to prevent the robberies from happening, but if we can't do that, then we usually adjust our deployment, and we put officers in those areas, and we see crime go down, and that happens time and time and time again. So officers matter. We need to have them out in the field, and as we see, we've made some progress in robberies, and we hope to continue that. The next category is assaults and aggravated assaults. Now, I want to explain to you all that shootings are included in this category. We break out shootings because shootings are so important and such a big issue for our city. We break that out, but these numbers that you see in aggravated assaults, our shootings are inclusive in these numbers. So we had a increase. As you see, the increase was a couple hundred, almost 200 aggravated assaults. 2381 is the number for 2021. This is another set of crimes where, at least the public ones, where deployment matters. It matters a lot. Now, some aggravated assaults happen inside people's homes, inside of businesses, and we can't always get to those and try to prevent them. But the ones that happen in the public, it's really important to have officers present and deployed and visible in those communities where these are occurring. These assaults include, as I said, gun-related violence, but they also include bodily weapons, feet, fists. They include knives. They include other weapons, sticks, bottles. So that's inclusive of all of our assaults. It went up from 2020 to 2021. It's something that we have to turn around. Very serious crimes, and again, policing matters in that. And on the investigative side, we have to do more in our investigations to solve more of these cases. So now we're going to go to property crime. Burglaries are the first category that I'll talk about. Now, burglaries 2020, and this was the year of the global pandemic, we saw a significant jump in burglaries. And we, as much as we tried to figure out whether the pandemic was partially responsible, there are some of those statistics in 2020 that are pandemic related. We had a rash of burglaries and lootings during June, late May of 2020, related to all the civil unrest across the country. So yeah, that contributed to it, but it went beyond that. Many of our San Franciscans had their houses and their garages broken into, businesses broken into, and we saw an uptick. The first half of this year, it was a significant uptick. So we adjusted our deployment. We put officers where these incidents were happening, including putting our plainclothes officers, deploying them at night, surveilling people who we believe to be involved in these burglaries. We made some key arrests. We were tracking the prolific burglars, and we were able to make arrests on many of them. And we started to see about mid-year, actually about May, we started to see those numbers started to decline, and they declined throughout the year. So we ended the year on a positive note with burglaries, but we're not out of the woods on burglaries. As you can see, we're far higher than we were in 2019 and the previous years, so we still have a lot of work to do, and we still have a lot of people to hold accountable for what they're doing. What we find with the burglary suspects is many of them are repeat offenders and they're prolific. So those are the ones that we have concentrated on, those people, those individuals. We've had some success. Some of our most prolific, once we got them in custody, we saw drops in certain neighborhoods where we believe they were active. And this goes beyond the city and county of San Francisco. I mean, they're hitting all over the Bay Area. So those are strategies that we'll continue to deploy with our burglaries. And we believe if we do that, they will continue to go in the right direction. So we ended the year on a good note, but we still have a lot of work to do. Next category is larceny, and this is the whole gamut of larceny. So this will include retail theft, auto burglaries, people who have their potted plants stolen from their porches, and package thefts and all. So as you can see, when you compare 2021 to 2020, it was a significant increase in thefts. And it's pretty much across the board. But when you look at this over the last 5 years, we were on a steady decline. 2020 was an aberration. COVID probably had to do with that significant drop. But then we go to 2021 and we get an increase in 2020. So we look at this over time, not as much out of whack as if you put an asterisk by what we believe was the impact of COVID with our decrease in 2020. But we were able to make some headway on a lot of these categories. Retail theft, we had the mayor and I some announcements this summer about how we were addressing retail theft. We did see a difference in some of those locations that were getting hit the hardest when we made those adjustments. And those adjustments included, we doubled the size of our retail theft our investigation unit. We added personnel to better coordinate our 10B deployment, which is our uniform officers that get hired by retailers. And the coordination between those off-duty officers and those on-duty officers is as good as it's ever been. So that has helped because that has led to better coordination, better coverage, and in some cases a reduction in those types of thefts. The other category that's been very stubborn in our city is the car break-in issue. Mid-year, the mayor made an announcement about our tourism deployment because what we were seeing is a lot of our areas in this city, we're talking about the iconic areas, Lombard Street, Fisherman's Wharf, Twin Peaks, where people come here and they want to see it. They have to see those areas, and then they come here and they get victimized. Their cars get broken into, their passports get taken, their luggage gets taken, and we're finding discarded luggage and passports all over the city. So mid-year, when the mayor made that announcement, we started what we termed our tourism deployment, and much of that was done on overtime. And the areas that we concentrated on, we saw significant decreases in car burglaries, significant decreases. So that deployment, although we had to make some adjustments, that deployment is still happening. We want to make sure that we focus on those areas, but we also want to make sure that the people that live here day in and day out aren't getting victimized. So there's a lot of work to be done there. We did see some turnarounds this year with our car break-ins, and we're going to continue to move those strategies forward in 2022 and turn this picture around. If you look at the long term, you can see the trends over from 2017 to 2019 was a decrease, and then 2020, that significant decrease, and then a rise in 2021. So we want to turn that around and not be above where we were last year in terms of the overall larceny picture. And we think some of the strategies that I mentioned will help, but it also helps to hold people accountable and bring them to justice when they do those types of crimes. Auto thefts is the next category. And we have a little bit of a longer view on auto thefts. And as you see, it'll be up in a second. You see a decline from 2015 to 2019, basically. Then 2020, there was a significant increase. That was somewhat of a trend that we saw in other cities as well. We do track other cities to see if what we experience here is something that's just in San Francisco, or is this something bigger? Auto thefts, many cities experienced increases. And we saw a significant increase in 2020, and then it leveled off a little bit in 2021, and we saw actually just a very, very slight decrease. So auto thefts is a big issue. We recover a lot of the cars that get stolen. Unfortunately, we don't solve as many of the cases as we would like to. So that's an area that we have to continue to work on. And there are some technology trends that we're seeing that we have to delve in more in terms of the thieves who are stealing cars are kind of a step ahead of the game with technology. So not anything that I can go into detail now on, but it's something that as we analyze these problems and we really understand kind of why these increases are happening, we definitely will share that with the public. So statistically, as the mayor said, and I will reiterate, there are ups and there are downs. There are areas where we've had some good progress, and there are areas like homicides where we have to turn it around. It takes people to do it. It takes commitment. It takes partnership. We want to do the job the way the people of the city expect us to do it. So while all of this is happening, we're pushing forward with all of our reform work that we committed to, and that is going very, very well. But that work, we believe, helps us police this city better. It helps us police the city in the way that people expect us and demand us to police it. And as you all always hear me say, we're not a perfect police department. We have issues, we have our problems, but what we are committed to doing is when we identify what those problems are, we're going to work to fix them and make them better. And that is what we pledge to you. And as we move through 2022, we're going to do everything that we can from a public safety and policing perspective to give the residents of our city the safest city that we can help them have. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. And if you all don't mind, we're going to take questions for the mayor first, and then I can take any policing questions, and then we can, anything in detail we can talk about offline. We have our team here. We can talk about details offline. So thank you.
Christian?
Wondering if you've seen successes from the Tenderloin emergency plan. Are you already starting to see some successes in that area, basically simply pushing the problem around? And then also, are you still hoping to graduate more? We talked before, and you hope to have more police recruits in the future, increase the number of officers.
And what do you mean by successes in terms of some of the people we've been able to help?
People that you're able to help, are you seeing fewer reported crimes in that area, fewer reports of, maybe this is something...
Yes, that probably more so for the chief, but I'll just say that I've gotten information for a number of stories of people that we've been able to help even on day one with someone who wanted to go into treatment and needed a TB shot, and we were able to do that and get them into a behavioral health bed before we were able to transition them into a location where they are getting help and turning their life around. We have a number of stories like that. I wouldn't say that we have like hundreds of stories like that. We'll probably be able to provide that as time goes on with what we've been able to accomplish so far. This is not a problem in the Tenderloin that was created overnight. The Tenderloin has had so many challenges for many, many years, and we saw during this pandemic things have gotten so much worse, even though we've added a number of resources to help support with mental illness and substance use disorder, with our street crisis response team, with our street wellness teams, with our street overdose teams, entities that were created to be an alternative response to policing, so that when folks are experiencing crisis, which does not in some cases require a police response, it requires clinician, paramedics, and other tools, those have been extremely successful, and I think we can get you the data later about the number of calls that they've responded to and how many people we've been able to help as a result of that. And as this Tenderloin deployment plan moves forward, we definitely need more time before we can provide statistics or specific information about the number of people that we've helped, but we are hopeful. I was there yesterday. I'm probably obsessed with going to the Tenderloin every day to see what's going on down there, and you know, it has its good days and it has its bad days, and I do appreciate the fact that it appears that this linkage center has been extremely helpful. And, you know, what we're hoping after we finish, hopefully with this, at least this surge of COVID, that we'll see more officers out on the streets in the Tenderloin community to help support the various agencies and programs that we have to help people.
On the Tenderloin Linkage Center, the Chronicle's reporting that drug use has been allowed at the Linkage Center. What is the policy on drug use there?
Well, we don't have a policy as it relates to this linkage center other than meeting people where they are. The goal is to allow people who suffer from addiction to come into this center, to no questions asked, to get food, to maybe get a shower, to get support, to get services, but we're not forcing anyone to do anything. And at the end of the day, you know, this is a place where there's no judgment, where there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and I wouldn't suggest that something like drug use is allowed, but it's happening all over the city, sadly. It's happening all over the Tenderloin. And regardless of this linkage center or any place else, we can't control who does or does not do or do not use drugs at any given location. Our whole point of why we set up this linkage center is to meet people where they are and to try and get them the help and the support that they need. So at this time, we are hopeful that they feel safe, they feel comfortable, they feel that they can trust this location so that when they are ready to get help, they have a number of people who are part of this nonprofit Help Right 360 that will instantly, immediately help deliver them to treatment, detox support, or whatever it is that they need.
It seems the Linkage Center is sort of a predicate to the larger effort to get people off the sidewalks and really make a difference on what the neighborhood looks like. Can you give us an idea of how far along we are and what has to happen next? And I know a lot of this depends on staffing with the police, but what should people expect to see in that neighborhood as far as what comes next?
Well, it's not just staffing with the police, it's Department of Public Health, it's for various agencies because, as I said, a number of city employees and nonprofit employees who typically would be the people that we would rely on to work in these establishments, to work in the Tenderloin, they've been out too in some cases with Omicron. And my hope is that people see a difference and they feel a difference. As you walk down Market Street, the sidewalks are clean. As you walk in parts of the neighborhood in the Tenderloin, you can actually get past the sidewalk and not see feces or step in feces or anything of that nature. My goal is to make it a walkable, livable, safe, and clean city, and that involves making sure that people who unfortunately have taken over in some cases many of the sidewalks and areas of the Tenderloin, that doesn't continue, and that those people who are suffering with addiction we're able to make sure that they're not overdosing out on the sidewalk somewhere, or that we're discovering them weeks after they've passed away in their tent. Like, we're trying to avoid losing lives as well. And so this kind of controlled environment is a way to, again, no questions asked, come on in, we're not here to judge, we're here to help you if you ask us for help, and we want people to feel comfortable coming into this space. And that's what it's about. It's getting people off the sidewalks, it's cleaning up the Tenderloin, it's addressing crime and the violence that occurs. Which unfortunately, I mean, you see the statistics, and it's gotten increasingly violent in the Tenderloin, the stabbings and the shootings on a regular basis. So we are trying to get a handle on that as well. And so we want people to see and feel a difference, and we're hopeful that in the coming months, as we continue to try and address this, it will be a noticeable difference, and people will not be so focused on, well, what's going on at the Linkage Center? We don't think it's right. Well, you know what? I don't think it's right to see it out on the streets in front of kids and to walk past needles and feces either. So, we got to pick our battles here. This is a solution that we are hopeful will lead to real change and will really lead to less crime and also less overdose deaths in San Francisco.
One follow-up on crime statistics in general, and specifically property crime, I guess. There's a lot of discussion about crime is up, crime is down. It's sort of this recurring discussion in the city. But when you step back in a big picture, property crime is high in the city. Do you think something gets lost in the sort of endless discussion of crime is up?
Well, I'll just tell you this. I know we talk about statistics as a way to communicate what we know is actually happening based on the information, because we know that also there are a lot of people who won't even report it. It's I'm sure in many cases it's more than that, but statistics really don't matter when you're a victim. And I think at the end of the day, I am hearing more stories from more people about situations that they have experienced that they are really blown away. And let's just take it back a little bit. People who I grew up with in public housing who are like, London, this is too much. This is, just the situations people are dealing with in the city. And I think at the end of the day, regardless of a statistic, when it happens to you and you used to feel comfortable and safe walking around San Francisco, and all of a sudden you're randomly attacked and then you're traumatized and you can't even walk your kids to school, that's a problem. So from my perspective, this city has to do more. And when these crimes are committed, when that line is crossed, we have no choice but to make sure that we follow through with investigations, that we arrest the possible suspects. When I was growing up, there were sometimes people who were arrested for crimes they never committed. But in San Francisco, and all the work we've done over the years around police reform and changes, the likelihood when we make an arrest, it's likely the person that we arrest. So they need to be held accountable, and justice for the victims of these crimes need to occur, just like justice for people who might have challenges with the criminal justice system that are unwarranted. Like, there's a balance that we have to strike here in order to deal with public safety. It's not either or, it's all of it. So we look at the statistics, yes, but when it happens to you, who cares about statistics? We need to make sure that the people of this city are safe, and a part of our public safety strategy does include police officers, and it is what it is. All right? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, yep. Yes, ma'am.
This question is actually regarding the SFO shooting from last week. Why was it that the department described the weapons as handguns and firearms and not as airsoft guns in the beginning?
So let me just first of all, we're going to have a town hall. We'll announce the date probably today or tomorrow, as we always do on these types of incidents. But let me just put the context of how these things work. This particular incident, as you all know, the State Attorney General's office is the lead investigative agency for the criminal investigation, so the officers, whether their acts were legal or not. When we have a shooting, no matter who investigates it, the scene is basically frozen. Evidence that's on the ground, whatever, is frozen until the people who are responsible and have jurisdiction to recover that evidence, to examine it, can get to it. That takes time. And in any situation, whether it's this one on Friday or whether it's any other case that we've ever had, you don't have confirmation of what you have immediately because the scene is frozen. In other words, if there's a gun on the ground, nobody's going to touch it and examine it for usually hours. So the notion that what we knew and when we knew it, all that comes out in the town hall, but I've seen some stories written that are questioning this department's integrity and its transparency on this, and it's really misplaced. Because anybody that understands this work knows that it's not even our investigation to begin with. We don't get to touch the evidence. We don't get to examine it. That didn't happen for hours, but by the time the state investigators showed up, San Mateo had responsibility for a while until the state made the declaration that they would take the investigation. So it's really kind of it's really misplaced and it's sad, to be honest with you. The way that narrative has been put out is really sad. Any other questions?
Chief, on the crime stats, there's been a focus on police staffing and the need to beef up the numbers in the force. So when you look at the increase in certain categories and how crime has been up in certain areas, how much of that is down to a lack of officers? Would you expect to see the similar numbers if you weren't working against the 20% reduction in police officers?
Let me make sure I understand your question, if you could ask it
I
again.
just wonder, in the categories of crime where we have seen an increase that you said was significant around theft or larceny or whatever it might be, and the fact that you're down numbers both in the overall numbers of police officers and also because of COVID, how much of a link do you put there? Do you think that you would see an improvement if you just had more officers to work with?
Yeah, in some categories, yeah, we believe definitely, because as I stated, robberies and crimes that happen in public spaces, those are the ones where you can really impact with robust deployment. And some of those, like thefts and car break-ins and all that, it really takes officers being out in the field and being visible. In addition to the backside, the investigative side, and all of that's been impacted by both our staffing shortages and this latest surge of COVID. So, yeah, I think, and this is anecdotal at best, but yeah, I do think it makes a difference. Okay. All right. Thank you all.